So 10 years later, I think I got really lucky that this is the camera I opted to go with back in the day because it was learning, like I'm a very techie guy now, but I was not back when I first picked this up. And the learning curve was so astronomically high to even shoot in auto, forget about manual, that I think if I didn't have a camera that could at least focus properly on its own, something that had really good autofocus like the Canon 70D, and I didn't even know that was the first camera that had really good autofocus at the time, I think maybe I wouldn't have stuck this out as a career. Which, considering that it's such a large part of my personality now because it's a hobby and a career and a passion, it's so crazy to think about because I likely would have just been a very different person. I'm convinced that nobody becomes a photographer or videographer on purpose, and that's my story. My story and the story of a lot of other people I know. Ooh, construction. I initially bought this camera to take photos of me and my friends at strongman competitions, as well as that Auto ISO holding up. And I tried my hand at YouTube videos. It didn't take me too long to find out that I was in fact just very boring.
Let's go.
So I stuck mostly to photos back then until something happened at work. I don't know if you guys know that card game, What Do You Meme? But I actually shot the first set of videos for it, for the company F. Jerry through a collaboration with Distractify, which is the place I was working at the time. And I shot it using this camera. I also shot stuff I didn't know was going to be great archival footage. For anyone who follows Strongman, I shot a clip of Evan Singleton at his first competition, North Carolina's Strongest Man, which got him an invite to Giants Live. And now he's a regular at World's Strongest Man and the Arnold and all of these Giants Live events across the world. But all of that was shot on this camera. This one right here, the Canon 70D. And this one, whew, that is rough. And this particular lens, the 1018, which funny enough, I just reviewed the Sigma 1018 for Fujifilm. I'll put a card above if you want to check out that video for something a little more modern. But the 1018 was kind of my all-around lens for shooting things indoors. Like, I didn't know what lighting was. I didn't know what shutter speed was. I didn't know much of anything. And all of my education outside of, I would say, actual editing that came with the Fujifilm camera, the X-T3, when I got there, and learning different frame rates and codecs and everything. But the 70D is a prosumer camera, crop sensor, which I feel like was less of a big deal back then than it is nowadays, with people going crazy about crop sensor versus full frame. It has a flippy screen, so it was great for content creators. And the big deal with this one in particular, this is the camera that Canon went with to debut dual pixel autofocus, which really kicked off the modern age of autofocus, which is, good autofocus. Over 10 years later, it's still really good autofocus. So if you're doing talking head videos at your desk, this is very much a viable option. This is a viable setup. Now, of course, it only shoots 1080p. Oop, we're going. It only shoots 1080p, but most people really don't need anything else, and it's hard to tell the difference between 1080p and 4K after you upload to platforms like YouTube because everything gets mushy, everything gets compressed, it gets put through their compression and denoising algorithm. But for kicks, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to upscale this using Topaz Video AI, which is a really nifty tool when I get some low-res videos from clients to edit, and we'll see how it holds up for the rest of the video. We're gonna do this in real time. Right now, we're in 1080p, and the upscale begins in 3, 2, 1. Let's do a split screen here. So you see half 4K, half 1080p. Maybe we can see if there's like a detail difference. I can't even tell if it exposed right. Let's swap this ND out a bit. Do you really see a difference? Probably nothing too crazy. Maybe pay a little more attention to the background rather than me. Generally speaking, I've used it as a third angle before, or overhead, which is why I still have this camera, honestly. There's absolutely no reason for me to still own it. For someone just getting into photography, for someone who wants to learn the basics, it's a very capable camera. And you have complete access to EF mount lenses, along with obviously EFS mount. The lens really dictates the image quality or video quality more than anything else does. It's just that when you're shooting video, having access to 10-bit, especially when it comes to color grading or to recovering highlights and shadows, like right now, if I bump this up, this is probably not going to look great. but I'm sure that if this were a 10-bit footage, it would be perfectly fine. And there are a lot of cameras nowadays for content creators that still shoot 8-bit, like the Sony cameras, the ZV-1 and the ZV-1 Mark II, and whatever other iterations of that. Great image quality, but they're all 8-bit. For photos, I feel like I could have shot with this camera for another 2 years maybe before I really switched over. Because for photos, I feel like the image quality, aside from cropping in and stuff, really isn't all that different from a lot of other things. So when I moved up to Jersey a few months ago, I hooked up with a local creative group and I wanted to test this out. I was going to make this video months back, but after moving and getting settled and everything, I was just tired. So we're picking that up now. And I haven't used the camera in so long that it reset to factory settings, so I didn't even shoot in RAW. So all these images, I'm going to overlay them right now. All of them are just JPEGs. And I think the JPEGs look pretty good. And for the record, the JPEGs coming out of this thing are actually very, very bad. So that's, that goes to say something. The logistics of doing collab shoots are just not as easy as they were down in the DC area. So I probably won't be doing any of those anytime soon. But I did go out afterwards and I shot some deer. I saw some baby deer as well, and I'll overlay that right now. Image quality on this thing, if you're shooting for social media, Instagram and TikTok, they top out at 3 megapixels if you're doing a full vertical image. I really wouldn't be too concerned about megapixel count, and the autofocus on this thing is still really, really good. I'd be surprised if I were out of focus at any point in this video. Because remember, this is the first camera with dual pixel autofocus. And funny enough, it's still better than some modern cameras. I mean, it's only recently that Panasonic managed to get it together to be on par with this thing. Fujifilm, great autofocus, but video autofocus, continuous autofocus is still, I think, inferior to this thing right here. The XH2S would be the exception in this case, but that just goes to show you, you're talking about I got this 10 years ago, but I think the camera itself is 12 years old. You're talking about a camera that's 12 years old and considerably less expensive, holding its own against the flagship cameras of today. I know that my head has been like in the shadows here. If I do a lot more of these talking heads in the cars, I'll install like a light up there or something to balance things out. But we're gonna take a walk around. Whew, there we go. Another thing I want to bring up before we go outside is that the Auto ISO on this camera in particular is better than most modern cameras. Certainly better than Auto ISO on Fuji cameras. And actually commercially on the R5C, I feel like it's faster. I'm not an Auto ISO guy typically, but driving in the car with all the different lighting shifts and whatnot, I said, you know what, let's test it for this video anyway. And I'm willing to bet that it did a pretty decent job, but I do have an ND filter on it. So because I'd rather have that 180 shutter than really choppy motion and slightly better exposure. I'm not a fan of that. The leaves are changing over, so let's do some video and yap a little bit so we can take a look at what the colors and everything look like. You know, it's crazy, whoa, is that I didn't notice that the leaves were even changing over. I've been so busy for the last couple of weeks. And also, Jersey, I mean, I grew up in Jersey, but I just feel like you have to drive everywhere if you want to see anything. That's probably the biggest thing that I miss about living in Virginia. Okay, so this is the 1024. It's a cheap lens, pretty inexpensive. You can find them used on Marketplace for like $100. Maybe one for 125 if you find it with the hood. So I'm going to switch over right now to the Canon 35mm f1.4 Mark II, and you'll see better image quality and everything. And that's just to kind of sell the point home that if you're just doing talking head videos and you're going like 30 minutes at a time, there is a 30-minute cutoff here. And that, for those who are aware, the 30-minute cutoff was part of this whole tax status in the European Union. So it was a big thing with DSLRs and hybrid shooters back in the day. Well, I'm going to swap that lens out, and we're going to take a look at what the world looks like with a more modern lens, with a higher end glass in general. It's EF mount and it has no image stabilization. I'll try some handheld shots, but just keep in mind that it's still a great lens, largely attainable glass for most people. And because of the Canon 1.6x crop factor, since this is a crop sensor camera, you are going to get something over between 50 and 60 millimeters. I think it's like 55 millimeters. Let me switch that out right now. So the wind is going pretty nuts right now. I'm guessing I'm going to have to treat the audio even with a little wind muff here later in the editor. but I want you to see what it looks like when you have a more premium lens on. Again, this is the 35-1.4 Mark II. You can probably find this on Marketplace, used, eBay for between $800 and maybe $1,000. I still have it because I shoot a ton of interviews and documentaries on the Canon R5Cs, and it still results really well on a higher megapixel sensor camera like the R5C. Now, one of the big criticisms of the 70D when it came out was that because of how the pixels, the dual pixel autofocus was arranged, it softened the image. I've never heard of that problem until years after the fact. And for video specifically, a softer image is typically preferred. And while that still is the case here, it looks like that sun's starting to peek out a bit. Let me try to... Well, that still may be the case here. I still keep my 1/8 Pro mist filter on because it's what I do like shooting most of my personal talking heads with. Too many lighting things going on when you're doing commercial work. I've got thoughts on that we can talk about in the comments below at some point. Now, let's test the autofocus here. I want to show you just how capable this still is. This has face tracking. This is long before eye tracking was a thing. So if you move quickly, it is going to lose you, but it picks you up really fast. And you can go into settings and actually adjust that. Let me see actually if I can put it into sport mode or something. Give me a second. I'm so used to this after shooting on the X-T3 for so long, but I have no idea what their proprietary settings are. It looks like this one's better though. Lost me there for a little bit. I know this is hard. This is definitely hard. Ooh, that Pro Mist filter is really working here. Look at this pimple. How bad is it? You see, the detail's still good because you can definitely still see it. If I edit this in Resolve, I might clamp it out, but I want to get this video out quickly. So you'll see it should track me and I should be in focus. At this point, probably the whole scene is in focus, but I can still see the little hitbox on me from here. That's a lie, I can barely see anything. Now I can see it on me. And that gives you an idea of what autofocus looks like if you want to do talking head and maybe use something that isn't an ultra wide angle. You want like this blurry background, this extra depth of field. And that just goes to show you that lenses do count for a lot more than the camera body you're shooting on when you want to get a pleasing image like this. Now that being said, we're about to do something fun. Let me show you what we're going to shoot on. I just realized that I left my Fuji adapter on this because I wanted to do a video adapting this to the XH2S as an alternative to the 200 f2, but this is Big Chungus, one of my all-time favorite lenses, the most expensive purchase I made while I was still shooting in the Canon ecosystem before moving over to Fujifilm. It's the Sigma 120-300 f2.8. Really, really, really cool lens. Phenomenal if you're a sports shooter. And honestly, this thing on its own, really heavy. Like this is a workout. This is a couple of pounds here. I want to say maybe 5 or 6 pounds, and the weight distribution is not great. But the images that come out of this thing on these older sensors, really solid. And if you're someone who shoots sports, this is a hell of a lot more affordable than the new Canon RF 100-300 f2.8. So I'm going to toss this on right now. We're going to go take a couple of photos, see what kind of images this can churn out. And I do have an ND filter that fits this, so I'll see if we can actually do some video as well. So we're going to go National Geographic on some of these leaves first. So the rolling shutter on this thing, for anyone curious, it's not great, which is fine for photos, for videos. Like you can see me, this is on a tripod, granted not a video head tripod. And the lens image stabilization is on, but the rolling shutter is so bad that if you move even a little fast, everything will turn into jello. But I just wanted to do this to show you, again, the glass really matters a lot more than the camera for image quality, obviously for resolution. This is just stuck at 1080p and 8-bit, and you're dealing with whatever colors you have for the most part that are in the camera. But I think it looks pretty good. Let's see what else we can get here. This is definitely not how anyone should probably be using this lens, but oh well. There's a big old cliff there. Look at that. They don't even have a built-in level into this camera, so it just has to look level enough to you. Now the limit in post, of course, here is going to be, I can't really bring up the shadows there too much because it will fall apart. There's no log. There's like fake log you can install, but it's really just a flat profile. It's too much on the ND. And there's no EVF, which is why I'm struggling against the sun to try to expose this image for video. But I mean, we're talking about a camera you can find nowadays for like 150 bucks. So maybe I should shut up. Let's go back to the ducks. They were more interesting, or the geese rather. All right, there's the setup there. I'll leave it in the background while I'm talking. I'm gonna have to sync this microphone audio to this, but so 10 years later, I think I got really lucky that this is the camera I opted to go with back in the day, because it was learning, like I'm a very techie guy now, but I was not back when I first picked this up. And the learning curve was so astronomically high to even shoot in auto, forget about manual, that I think if I didn't have a camera that could at least focus properly on its own, something that had really good autofocus like the Canon 70D, and I didn't even know that was the first camera that had really good autofocus at the time, I think maybe I wouldn't have stuck this out as a career, which, considering that it's such a large part of my personality now because it's a hobby and a career and a passion, it's so crazy to think about, because I likely would have just been a very different person. Also, this lens back in the day, this thing was 10 grand. Like, ugh, I got it on sale for 8. I don't even know if you can buy this nowadays. I've seen it used for like $2,500, which is crazy to see because it's still a pretty good lens. And I wanted to, at some point, let me know if you want to see this video. I really have to kind of plan for it. If you want to see this mounted onto a Fujifilm camera and see how it performs, let me know in the comments below. Look, there's a couple there. That's so cute, I think. I can't see. This EVF, there's no EVF in this LCD. It's terrible. Maybe they're just friends. Yeah, I can't see Jack. Oh, is that a photographer taking photos of a couple? That's so adorable. I don't do weddings or anything, but I wouldn't mind doing like an elopement or something at some point. It's a great spy lens. Alrighty, I'm trying to find a spot to wrap this up, but I wouldn't be doing my due diligence as a YouTuber if I didn't tell you to like and subscribe. So maybe do that while I try to find a place. Those are some nice leaves. Ah, yes, so majestic. Wonder if there's enough shade for me to finish recording right here. Not ideal lighting conditions. What does it look like when everything's blown out? Let's see. It's gonna work. Not great. All right, give me a second. You know what's funny is that this place is packed with people, and back in the day, you couldn't get me to talk even on the phone in public. Nowadays, you just stop caring completely. 10 years later, Canon 70D, is it a camera I can recommend for someone? Absolutely. If you're just doing photos, it's still a great stills camera. If you're doing social video or personal video like this, I still think it's very usable. It isn't often that we're sitting for more than an hour talking, but if you're going to be doing a podcast, you just can't do it. Even if you do HDMI out, this camera does not have clean HDMI, so you'd have like all the camera stats around, your shutter speed, ISO, all that stuff going out. And if that's what you want a camera for, then this is not the camera for you. But for most people, a lot of which who still use cameras like the Canon T6i, this is a pretty good camera. It's a bargain, especially compared to something like its modern day equivalent. The Canon R50, I think, is the closest you'll ever get to it. But I'd still recommend this one over the Canon R50 because this has better APS-C lenses, and this has better APS-C lenses, and the Canon RF ecosystem until very recently didn't even have third-party lenses. And those third-party lenses are only the crop, only the RFS lenses. This is a very cost-effective way to get into photography and videography. You can find one on Marketplace, Craigslist, eBay for under $200 in really good condition, and they definitely hold up the test of time. Also, you've got a better chance of finding cheap high-end glass like this 35-1.4, which I'm really digging right now. I don't think I've ever shot a talking head on it before, not for myself at least, because to put a package like this together for any other camera system, any modern camera system, it's going to cost you somewhere north of $2,500 to $3,000, whereas this entire package here, it'll probably set you back $800 or $900 depending on how hard you look. I feel really nostalgic shooting on this thing because I didn't have this skill set, and recently I've really begun to appreciate the older camera bodies, especially something like this. Now granted, your average phone is definitely going to be shooting a higher resolution image, but no matter what, you're not going to get something that looks like this out of your iPhone. There are great lens attachments, and yes, it is the camera that's always with you, but come on, what would you rather have? Something that looks like this, bokeh out, kind of blown out in the background? Yeah, definitely blown out in the background there. Got a selfie screen, so there's something phones don't have. Or what you get out of a selfie. Also, I know it's frowned upon to say this nowadays, but shooting on this thing is fun. It's fun. Shooting on any camera is fun. And it's a lot funner than using a phone. As much as I would love to drop some Amazon affiliate links for this thing in the description below, you're not going to find this thing new on Amazon. Just keep your eyes peeled on Marketplace. The 80D is essentially the same camera, except I think it shoots up to 1080p 60. And the 90D is what the Canon M50 is, but in DSLR format. So it has better 1080p autofocus and shoots horrible, horrible, terrible 4K. And that 4K doesn't have autofocus, by the way. It has like contrast-based autofocus. It goes hunting. It's just, don't do it. Trust me on this. So this was a fun and nostalgic video for me. And if you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. I've got a new episode out every Wednesday, and that will be the next time I catch you, see you. I don't have an official sign off. I got to work on that.